Chameli here with Maleda, and it feels as if we are, as a field, as the global field of women exploring awake consciousness through the female form. It feels as we are entering into a new phase, which does not negate or erase, of course, all the practice and all the wisdom gathered from our ancestors and our own practice. But nevertheless, we are moving towards a greater authority or a greater reclamation of our seat, our relationship to Goddess, not as something outside ourselves or something only found in the books or in the traditions. You know, the source that all traditions and all the goddess paths are arising out of, the source was accessed through human, yeah? That's how we translated this mystery into these different paths. And here we are, having prepared our vessel and our instrument in order to also access that source. And how does this source want to express itself today? What is it that we are making ourselves willing to express and transmit? And how do we stay rooted in that direct connection? That's what we are exploring. And one thing I was thinking, Maleda, I was thinking yesterday, we went to the river yesterday, and I was feeling into your history, your path, which is quite, remarkable path, and how you dedicated so many years in an ashram, honoring and following tradition, also worshipping Goddess and doing, what Goddess practices. And yet, it took for you leaving the ashram and embarking on a solo journey for you to shift your relationship to Goddess from something that you one day would reach,
exactly,
to being present here. And yeah, would you like to share? I'm so curious about that shift. What was it that allowed that shift?
It was really massive for me. It's actually started when I was still in the ashram, and it was that shift beginning inside of me that then had me leap, because I had a couple of blasts of awakening while I was still in that structure of the ashram, and it's those blasts of consciousness that then gave me the impetus and the energy to leave all the structures and everything that I had built until then. And it was an absolutely massive movement inside of me, absolutely massive, because I had surrendered fully to this path of tradition, of structure, of hierarchy. I'd had huge initiations, titles, and leadership, and all of this that comes along with that system. And I had dedicated myself to a guru, a teacher, and I had taken vows. So this I took, especially the vows at that point, I had taken very, very seriously, as one should, any vow that they take. And what began to happen for me, I began to understand that after 8 years of being totally immersed in that, not as something I just did in the mornings or the evenings, but 24/7 complete surrender and immersion into that, I didn't necessarily feel myself any closer to what I knew was possible deep in my bones, deep in my womb, in my heart, that I knew was possible in the feminine, that I had started with, and something began to feel really like, something isn't you know, clicking in, and it was something about the constant striving. Like even the practices were all about striving and reaching and calling in and invoking and all of these things that were shaped around bringing something that seemingly maybe a part of you, but a distant part of you that you need to call in and or reach for. You know, that it's not something already, you know, completely available to you in this moment. And there was something about doing that constantly that just exhausted me, absolutely exhausted me spiritually. And that I knew I had gone and done it, you know, how many hours and days and years upon end had I been doing that. And I didn't really see the kind of significant shift that I knew was possible. And at a certain point, I started realizing that where the kind of openings and spontaneous ecstasy that I would experience would happen when I was out on my walks in nature. Every evening I would take a walk, and I was sharing this with Chameli that I would spend all day long not only in these practices but teaching these practices and doing a lot of seva, a lot of service work all day long. And the only time I would feel the real fruit of it was when I would take these evening walks, you know, and then it would just be this spontaneous, relaxing, open, and exploding into ecstatically blissful states, literally dancing and singing in the streets and out in Mother Nature, and moving into complete ecstasy. And then along with that, sometimes these blasts of consciousness that would just be this blossoming open into vast states of consciousness without trying to get there, and it would just kind of happen, you know. And then at a certain point, something happened where I was out on one of these walks, and I was in this practice that I was just letting go of everything, and it was just something I had read in a non-dual text somewhere, you know, just, you know, letting go of identifying even trees or grass or anything like that, and, you know, kind of going underneath of everything. And it was a combination of me, you know, doing that very relaxed, in a very relaxed way, not in a like, I'm practicing this way, but in a very like, let me just see if I don't call that a tree, if I don't call that a blade of grass, and I just kind of go underneath and feel the presence under. And I had a massive blast of awakening of what I now know as what I call omnipresence, and it's when I feel myself as the presence underneath all of form. And it lasted not long, maybe 10 minutes that time, but it was so significant that I came back from that walk and I looked around at my life and I said, what the hell am I doing here? What the hell am I doing? All of that striving, all of that reaching, all of that calling it for something that was so easily available if I just relaxed into what was already there and just dropped underneath of what was already there. And everything changed from that moment forward. And it took me 3 years after that moment to leave, because I had taken my vows so seriously, and I had a lot of internal structures I had to allow to dissolve into that presence in order to get the courage. It took a lot of courage to leave that. And I knew when I left that I was leaving not only that particular structure, but all structures like that. It was very intentional that this was a time for me to, all the books I had consumed, which were hundreds and hundreds of spiritual books, all of the teachings of my teacher whispering in my ear, this is how you get to enlightenment, this is how you do this and that, all of that had to fall away. And I had to just see what would naturally arise if I just went into deep presence like that again. And so after I left the ashram, I went and did that systematically for months afterwards. And I went on deep retreat in Lake Titicaca, Bolivia, and I gave myself that gift of just doing that and sitting there day after day communing with the lake and letting all the internal structures fall away of what, even though I think a lot of times we build concepts around what happens when you awaken, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to look like. Suddenly you're going to have a halo over your head and you're going to be like, you know, revered on the streets, and everyone's going to know you're like this enlightened master, you know. All of these pictures and images that we get in our heads, you know, even that you're going to suddenly blast open and you're going to be swimming in light, you know, all these stories we hear, you know, of all the masters that tell their stories about how. And so then you start thinking that's it's going to, and if that doesn't happen, it's not happening, which is a big trap. So I let all those stories fall away, everyone's description of it, everything that I had ever learned systematically just crumble away inside of me. And what happens if I just sit here and breathe in my womb with the lake and just let, and what I began to happen was that my consciousness just naturally began to descend, which now I know is a natural movement of feminine consciousness. It's a descent into being, a descent into source. And it's that downward facing triangle. And that just began to naturally happen when I sat there day after day and was just breathing with the lake. It was this natural descent of consciousness into my womb. And I didn't even totally realize that was happening in the moment. It was just this movement. And then in one day, I could feel it because I could feel it was like the veils parting. And I knew it because I'd experienced it in that moment before. And it's this very tangible movement of my consciousness just opening like that to be one with all, you know, spontaneous thing. And I felt it happening. I said no this time, because before when I'd done it, I could feel it collapse again out of fear. It was like, oh my God, what's that? You know, and then as soon as you start doing that, it just collapses in again, right? And so I felt that happening, and I said, no, this time I'm gonna let it happen. I'm just gonna relax into it and let it happen. And at the time I was actually in a cave on the lake, like in this cave inside of the lake that was a womb cave of Mother Earth, and very, very powerful. And I was in there and I was meditating and I was chanting, and I just felt to slowly get up and dance, and something in the way I moved my body and the chant of invocation of Mother Gaia and the relaxing into that, something in that combination, I felt it starting to happen. And this time it was very different than the first time. This time it was the first time it was almost like this vast consciousness. This time it was a presence. This time it was full. It was very distinctly feminine. It was a very distinct opening to the omnipresence of Mother Nature, which is a different level of consciousness than the original sort of Zen state that I was in. It was a very tangible difference. And it happened. It just happened. The gateways, the veils dropped, the gateways flew open, and then suddenly I felt myself as the omnipresence underneath all of form and running through all of form. And there was no limit to it. There was no form to it, really, even. And yet I was fully aware, because it's a feminine presence, I was fully aware of the body of life. It wasn't transcendent at all. And it just so happened, and this was just such a confirmation from Mother Nature, it just so happened that it started thunderstorming and lightning, and I was in this cave outside, and it's getting dark, you know. It's this massive movement of the power of nature, and I felt myself as that. It wasn't just then the formless, and it was like I was the lightning coming down and the rain coming down and the waters and how it was hitting that. And my body was this tiny little vessel that I was then, that was kind of like in the very sort of like a grain of sand in the epicenter of this vast presence. And yet I wasn't removed from my body. I was clearly there with my body. And I went outside of the cave, and I just opened myself then to the force of Mother Nature in my body, but at the same time I was the force. So it's the full spectrum of this experience of being the body of life. And I knew for the first time in this lifetime I had landed in self. I said, this is everything that I was striving for, that I was efforting for, that I was trying to make happen before, was available when I just completely went into that non-contrived state and relaxed into myself. And it was also the spontaneous movement of allowing my devotion to be expressed in whatever way it wanted to through my body, you know, through the chanting, through the dancing, through just breathing with Mother Nature. And that's what blasted me open into what I call the state of omnipresence, feminine omnipresence. And that lasted for days, you know, that particular opening, and is never truly left to this moment. So even when it comes back to, you know, when a layer of healing needs to be arise at the different levels of the full spectrum of who we are, that never really totally goes away. And that's the difference. And then all of the human layers that need to heal, and all of the deep soul pain from the ages and all of that, as it arises layer by layer, it's held within that presence. It's never that agony of separation, that yearning to merge, that yearning to be one with her is then alchemized into greater and greater states of that. But it never goes into the full agony of separation, has never since then again.
Yeah. I want to just I like to see patterns, and of course here we are, it's sitting in the paradox of somehow questioning or have a, you know, change our relationship to paths. Not that we should throw them all away, but also recognizing if the paths, the structure are you know, leading us away from the source or to closer. And I just want to highlight some of the things from your story, just knowing that every path is unique, you know, is intimately experienced through each one of us uniquely. There are still some archetypal maps or patterns that I recognize in your unique story, and I just want to highlight them. So the first that comes to me, the first kind of Shakti key or signpost, first crossroad, was yeah, first of all, you open to nature. So nature is just this powerful teacher that, again, we can have some kind of poetic relationship to, or thinking we have to connect with her, or lost our connection with her, or we can create her into something other. But of course the way that you started to experience her was just that she was you. Yeah, she is you. And that was a returning to an innocence, returning to a knowing that nobody can take away from you, that nobody can know better than you, you know, because you are all that. What also I hear it was the courage, and a shift of loyalty. Yeah, it was a shift of loyalty to honor that direct connection more than anything. That allowed you also to see through some pretty strong commitments and vows you had made, which was, like you said, we want to honor that, but also then to look at them freshly if they don't fit anymore, or if you have grown past them. So to leave the coziness and your position, you know, it takes courage, but also that it's like loyal. You shifted your loyalty from guru, and in one way, the guru, that's the purpose of gurus, is to point you to that direct connection. So in one way, she did her job. And then what I heard you say was that a lot of your process was also to really dismantle the structures and teachings, and that you saw that a lot of these ideas of how it should look like was actually hindering you to innocently experience who you are. Yeah. And to trust your experience of it. And I also hear you say, when you traveled to the lake in Bolivia, I also see a deep listening and a return to innocence again. Is that innocence that initiated you to an authority? It's like a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we think authority is something we have to put on, and now I'm the teacher, or I am the knower, but all of that actually it becomes a very opaque,
very
dusty layer.
Yeah.
And that the authority of of you being vessel expression of the omnipresence is only accessible through your pure innocence. So your willingness to not know anything. Then you are initiated into the great knowing. So beautiful. And then what also comes to me is to honor, and I think this is a huge point for many of us, is that many of us have, you know, I would assume actually that all of us have these glimpses with the veiled parts. We have that recognition, reconnection with who we are. And then what happens next is important. Yeah, what is it? What do you do with it? Yeah, that moment, are you making it into an experience? All experiences come and go. Or are you comparing it to all the books you've written? Or are you clinging or grasping? And this is you know, what do you do with that experience? And one of the things I get from you is like, is that was so strong that you could not honor that, yeah, and make that the center point of your life. And that changes everything, because then you move into the next moment from that experience, not like, oh, I had this great experience, and then you begin to conceptualize it or put it into boxes, and it slips out of your hands, and then you are seeking again. Or you think that, oh, this looked very different than what I read in the book. It can't be the real
that
deal.
one's big.
Yeah, exactly.
That one's big.
Yeah. And then you move into the trap, in the hamster wheel again.
Right.
And also one thing that I just remembered that I also heard you say was that what happened was a non-grasping. And there actually, how I link that is actually to our practice. That, because one can say when we speak like this, one can, you know, make the conclusion that, oh, you don't need tradition or you don't need practice because it's who you are, and it's your innocent birthright, yeah. But when the veil start to part, because we have so many concepts around it, we begin to grasp and make the experience into something. And actually that muscle of unclenching, of letting the experience come and then just drop deeper into it without, you know, all the thought structure wants to put it into a box and a label, because that's how the brain works. And actually that to train the muscle of ungrasping, I would say, is the purpose of spiritual practice.
Very well said.
Yeah, because when it happens.
So in that feels really, really important, what you just said about the non-grasping, because that was so significant. For me, that is one of the fundamental things that had fallen away in the crumbling, what I call the process of crumbling, the crumbling away of all the structures and the programs and all that. The spiritual programs even, I'm talking about. Not just the conditions of society and all that. I'm talking about spiritual programs that we take on. That is supposed to look a certain way, and it, you know, it happens through this tradition or that tradition or whatever, you know, all of those things too. And at a point, when those fell away, it was almost like when I felt that happening, and through my whole process of sitting there day after day and deeply listening and deeply presencing, you know, with the lake and the presence of life, it was this movement towards what feels good, not what's supposed to be. It was just like, oh, that feels really good if I just relax that out, and what if I just relax where I'm clenching right there, or what if I relax that concept out? And it felt so incredibly liberating, so incredibly tangibly freeing, that I just kept doing it with everything that arose, you know, all spiritual concepts that arose, all of the structures, all of the grasping on what awakening looks like, or the ideas I had around that. The more I relaxed that, as you say, the clenching around it, when I relaxed that, to really, really presence how incredibly good it felt. That's what kept me going. That's what kept me sitting there and doing that day after day.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's really important in our activities as we awaken to really presence how good it feels when we heal something, when we free something, when we open to something, because that gives us the impetus to keep going.
Yes, yes, yes,
you know?
yes.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to me is this about how these structures or concepts of awakening are helpful, you know, as a means to communicate, but in our awakening process they can become hindrances if we are more loyal to them than the actual experience. And then to see that the structures and concepts of spiritual awakening, it's actually quite a trap, especially for women, because those role models and symbols of awakening were created for men, by men. So you will guaranteed fail if you are comparing yourself to that.
That's right.
But then, out of that pain, I remember in the beginning when we were starting to practice in the women's circle, we very much came out of this longing to create our own models of awakening, our own concepts of awakening. But looking a little bit closer at the field today, we can see that that again has also become a trap of how the woman yogini priestess should look like, how the goddess should look like, and it's a certain kind of Instagram friendly look that we all are gluing onto, and inevitably begin to comparing ourselves with, and we are back in the same trap. So you see that it's the same pattern, it's the same construct, it just has now goddessy clothes on, but it's the same machinery that we have to be awake to.
Is when it comes down to it, it's you and her. That's it. Nothing else matters. If you really, really are ready, you know, to cross that threshold, that's the place we have to get to. That's the yumminess, you know, where it's like nothing else matters. I don't care, you know, if some guru should walk up to me and say, "You're not awakened, what are you talking?" I'd be like, I'm exactly where I've always wanted to be. That's all I know. I don't know what you call that thing, but you know, I definitely don't use the word enlightened, because I actually do think that's a very particular place, a realm of consciousness that people go into that I don't really work with that, because I think it's very mind-based, masculine-based, and it's not the ultimate fruit of the feminine path. I don't feel that that's the fruit. And you know what happened was, at one point when I was sitting there on the beach, and I never had this question again. Do you remember yesterday I was saying to you, sometimes I need to explore possibilities, and then as soon as I try it and it doesn't work, then I don't like it, and it's off my list. The question is off my list forever. So this is exactly that on this domain. I was sitting there on the beach, and I remembered that first awakening that I had, which was much more of a Zen sort of empty masculine state, right? And the one which I'm ever grateful for, because that actually gave me the energy to leave what I was in. And yet it wasn't it. It wasn't it. It wasn't. It was like it was on its way to it, you know, but it wasn't it for me. And so I was sitting there on the beach, and I actually tried that on again. You know, I said, let me go to that place I was and see if that's it, you know. And I did that. I went back to that zone I was in, or that realm or state of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, I was in. And I tried it on again, you know, and I said, this isn't it. This isn't what makes me feel like this is it. You know, I've landed so fully in myself. I don't want anything else. That place didn't give me that. The place of emptiness, of Zen, of just, it was, don't get me wrong, I'd rather have that than the, you know, than the full closure, you know. And yet it wasn't it. It was only when I opened to the fullness of the presence of the body of life that it was it for me. And it's a feeling that is so non-mental, so non-analytical. You just know it because you feel your whole being sitting in that seat of, oh my God, this is it. This is who I am. And nothing else matters in that place. You don't care what anybody says about what awakening is, enlightenment, whatever. It doesn't matter because you're in it for you. And I do honestly feel that different people, there's the masculine and feminine, but there's also different paths, and I do feel that there's different states of awakening and sort of realms of consciousness to move into, and that each one of us are designed to realize one of those realms, or all of those realms, which I call the Great Mother Consciousness, which is everything, all encompassing every realm of consciousness, every realm of being, from the most exalted states of cosmic consciousness down to the cells of our body. That for me is Great Mother, you know, and that's what I know I'm here to realize, you know. So it's like, and everything falls within that. So I don't discount any of those other things. I think they're equally as valuable to the tapestry of life, you know. And yet for me, it's not it until it's the full spectrum of the body of life, the full spectrum of consciousness, a full spectrum of love and beingness.
That's beautiful. And I think that is it's a very helpful framework to bring with us into this new phase of awakening, that is not so often given to us in the maps available, is the integration part and the full spectrum of her expression, that there's nothing outside her, because then we don't fall into the trap and things are contracted or stuck and sticky, to interpret that as other than, or, oh, I've lost her. Yeah, we have a framework to hold that, oh, even when it's this sticky stuck, I'm never thrown out of her. Like you said, you don't have that agony of separation. Even when life is painful, which it's bound to be sometimes, yeah? And that's the trap that many of us find ourselves like, I got it, I lost it. Yeah. I got it, I lost it. Which is, again, it's just a machinery that has no end. It has no end. You cannot fix that within that realm. Yeah? But to then expand your consciousness to have a framework to hold all of that as part of her journey. And I love the way you also hold that journey. I love the way you hold your seed. That it's not only to experience her or to realize her as you and in you and in all things, but to also integrate and weave healing into the different contractions that is part of this realm and many other realms, and that you actively do so much healing work. Yeah,
that's what I call her activities in life, you know. And depending on, you know, your dharma, those activities are going to be different. You know, like my activities, you know, on the inner realm span from, you know, helping individual souls to heal to planetary healing, and to beyond this planet, to other realms of healing and other levels of dimensions and beings and all of that. But healing is definitely the trajectory from my dharma, you know, and so that's what I call her activities in life. So it's not just a static state of realization. I don't know if there is such a thing anyway, but it's also like, then it kicks in. That didn't kick in for me for a little while after that, across that threshold. I mean, my own individual healing kicked in right away and was part of that whole thing moving inside of me. It was part of what I called her reclaiming my soul back unto her, you know, open to the vastness of the full spectrum of her being, and then addressing all of the layers of pain in my soul that didn't realize that yet. And yet that never left, if that makes sense. So it's like gathering her back in. But the larger work of her activities on the planet and the universe, that kicked in after a certain level of soul healing had happened, that I had enough free consciousness and energy to then start looking at how else can I serve from all of these ways that I've learned how to heal my own soul and my own human experience of life. How does that then apply to the planet, to Mother Gaia, to all of the ways that humanity is polluted and, you know, blocked up her energy channels and prevented the magnificence of her spirit being in full blossom again, you know, and then beyond that. And all of these were simple unfoldments sort of that began to occur spontaneously within my own individual healing process. So again, it's like I discovered my dharma, my larger dharma, by relaxing into what came naturally to me. Within the throes of my own healing, then something else would piggyback on, like, oh, and look, you know, there's some clearing to do on that land I was on, or this entity needs to be removed from here, and these, you know. But that was, again, a spontaneous movement of her activities and her consciousness within me that just began to flower open, like this, just blossom
That's
open.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
I know that you in your life, you very early took seriously your longing for freedom, and that you have made your life about that.
Yes.
Following that longing of your heart. But for many women, there is a very strong voice in our collective that tells us that to honoring that longing and wisdom of the heart is somehow narcissistic, or it's selfish, or it is removed from life, it's woo-woo. And I just love, again, to reflect back what you were sharing from your experiences, that to actually establish yourself and plant your roots in that direct experience, and that direct connection to source and her intelligence is social activism.
Completely.
Yeah, it is to take full responsibility at last. And
Yes.
it's the opposite,
Very well said.
and what we sometimes the frameworks we have a hold on that. It's actually to take seriously that wisdom in your heart is what heals us.
Yeah. And then you're awake to your full capacities to make a difference.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done what I do now 10 years ago because I didn't have those. I was too stuck in the programming and the system and the structure to be able to even access the realms of consciousness and healing, essence and all that I can do today, And I very much feel it's activism. Very much feel that. I'm active 24/7 in those realms on the inner planes.
Imagine every woman on this earth in full alignment and surrender to her.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it gives me shivers.
Wow. Yeah, I got total goosebumps when you said that. That's what I feel Mother Gaia is calling us towards, and what is pressing through for all of us now. It's a no holds barred moment. That's how I feel. It's all hands on deck, sisters. It's all hands on deck right now,
It's all you and her. You and her.
Yeah. And we need need her, the full, just as there's a full spectrum of her presence, there's a full spectrum of her activities. Definitely not everyone is wired to do what I do, and that and the full spectrum of activities are needed as well, And I'm so grateful for those who are more engaged on the sort of external social realms of life and addressing it on that level, because that absolutely needs to happen. Absolutely needs to address, just like we're on the individual, we have all these different levels of our being, so does the collective. And it needs to be healed on every possible level and awakened on every possible level, and we all have a role to play in that. And they're all necessary. All hands on deck.
Oh.
And I'm so grateful to have you. I'm so grateful to have you in my world, and as a constant inspiration and constant source of love and companionship in this whole journey.
It means a lot, doesn't it? Yeah. To be seen and to be recognized. I feel that